The Border Studies makes a big deal of saying, oh, well, we're not really in the game of making sure that students memorize long lists of things. But then they put these enormous lists of things in every single syllabus that you just need to memorize. I'm going to show you the easier way to memorize it, but let's just start by taking the banks out. Let's assume that you understand what a bank is, that you know how to spell bank, and that you get the idea of what a bank does. These other ones are probably less familiar to you. By putting it into a list like that, you kind of get what the idea is. Investment banks, finance companies, and the Australian Securities Exchange are very, very different, unique things that we need to go into the advantages and disadvantages of each of those. Superannuation funds, life insurance companies, and unit trusts, the differences between them are pretty small. They basically do the same thing, and the differences between them don't really matter. And because this is a cram app, we're not really going to go into the differences between all of them. You just need to know what they as a group do, because they pretty much do the same thing. The first one we're going to look at is an investment bank. What does an investment bank do? So Goldman Sachs is a big American investment bank. Macquarie Bank is an Australian-ish one. It's not really a bank though, because an investment bank, they do provide debt like a bank, but they also provide equity, but they only provide it to businesses. So they have short-term debt, long-term debt, equity. They have all sorts of ways of giving businesses money, but it's only businesses. You can't go there and say, oh, I want to buy my first car. Can I have some money, Macquarie Bank? They're not going to give it to you, right? The advantage of this is that you, as a business, have a huge amount of flexibility. There's no, like, if you go to, a bank, if you go to Westpac or something, they have this set list of different loans that you can have. And they've got set interest rates and blah, 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 that you have to choose from. A place like Macquarie Bank, because you're getting a large amount of money and because you're a business, they can tailor it to your needs. They can tailor a debt solution or an equity solution to your needs. The disadvantage, though, is that they might have conditions in loans that they give you or in equity agreements that are not best for the business. So we've looked at this before. Macquarie Bank says, oh, look, we want to invest $10 million of equity into your business, just give us 51% control, and then you've lost your business, right? That is a pretty big disadvantage. Finance companies like GE Capital and Asanda, and some of you and your families may have had some run-ins with a finance company in the past, but for a business, they provide debt for businesses. So short-term and medium-term. They're really not providing long-term loans for businesses, like 30-year mortgages or anything like that. They're finance companies rather than building societies, right? They're not really long-term. They're more for, we need money to pay these bills over the next month or something like that. The advantage is that it's very, very fast, and some people would say too fast. If you've ever gone to like Harvey Norman and your family's gone, okay, we want to buy a TV, they go, yep, all right, here's $10,000. You go, well, what? How? What? Wait a sec. And then you just automatically spend the entire amount and end up in trouble. The fast access to finance can be an advantage, but can also be a disadvantage. The big disadvantage is the higher interest rate. For businesses, they don't really do that whole, how many months interest free. But the interest rate is going to be higher. If you know you can pay it back, a finance company can be a very, very, cheap, quick, effective source of finance. If you are not real sure you can pay it back, they can bury you. So they are, pretty dangerous. Superannuation funds, life insurance companies, and unit trusts, all three of these groups, they pool money together and use it to invest in businesses. So for superannuation funds, people work, their business puts money in superannuation and a superannuation fund for them, and the superannuation company gambles that money away. Right? They gamble that money on shares, and that's investing in a business. Right? Life insurance companies do the same thing. You pay your life insurance, but hey, you don't die, so that money is just sitting there. But it's not just sitting there. They take your money, they take the money that you've put in your life insurance policy, and they gamble it, like on the share market. And unit trusts do the same thing. They all pool together money and use it to invest in businesses. And there's no real way of going, all right, here's a list of advantages and disadvantages, because it's really down to every individual account that they have. and in terms of what they're investing in, what shares they're investing in. And usually they don't invest in like an individual business. They invest in just a small amount of shares, like 1% of the shares, in a business. Sometimes they do larger ones. Sometimes they do large amounts. It's more than 10%. They do sort of direct investment, but mostly they're just trying to make money by the share price going up, and all that sort of stuff. So they're not really trying to control businesses. The last one, the Australian Securities Exchange, the ASX. And it is important that you do write Securities Exchange. It's something that the markers will pick up on, because it used to be called the Australian Stock Exchange, but the Australian Securities Exchange, because they merged, it doesn't really matter. But the ASX is where securities, so for example shares in this case, are bought and sold. The advantage of getting money from securities, from shares, from that ASX, is that you do have access to enormous amounts of money. Right? The ASX, is this huge, international, stock market or share market or securities exchange. So you do have access to huge amounts of money, and it's not going to add to the business's debt levels because you're not borrowing money; you're getting money through equity. The disadvantage, though, is it does cost money to be listed with the Australian Securities Exchange, right? There, is an alternative now, and there's going to be more alternatives. We're going to have in Australia, we're going to have, multiple securities exchanges. So hopefully, if they compete with each other, the costs to be listed are going to go down. And it also costs money to comply with their requirements. So it costs money to prepare a prospectus. It's not just like the printing costs or anything like that. The actual preparation of the prospectus is a very difficult process. You also need to then give annual reports. You need to make all that information public. It goes in the newspapers, etc., etc. So you can end up, having some of the ugly details about your business being exposed just by deciding to go onto the ASX to get that money. So those are the main financial institutions and what you need to know about them.